Hi everyone and welcome. In this recording, I'm going to be speaking about the astrology of the present moment because there is so very much going on in the sky, and we do see this intensity in a very straightforward manner playing out before our very eyes. And I'm not just speaking about the collective situation, but also personally, individually. This is where the karmic energies are on total haywire mode. This is where every single stone within us, so this is within our psyches, within our unconscious, within even the depths of our soul, well, everything is gonna be moved. Now, before I get into the details, I would just like to apologize. Today's recording may not be my 100%, but I do believe that there are so very powerful and deep lessons that the sky invites all of us, one by one, collectively, individually, in groups, in communities, regardless of how we are organized. This is where the sky almost demands from us that we pay attention, because there is much to be understood. And this is the reason why I even risk putting this up, knowing too well that it's not my 100%, and this recording will definitely not advantage me professionally. But then again, a lot of people are in deep torment and suffering just a few hundred kilometers from me. And basically, I cannot help myself but to be flooded by the sorrow, by the despair, by the fear. Yes, but at the same time also a kind of love and compassion and the rising of the human spirit in a way that I personally at least never ever experienced before. So this is where there's definitely not just one side to the coin, and there is not just one expression of power playing out in the world. There is at least two, and the second one is just as intense, it is just as strong, and if not getting even stronger than violence, than the war, than the shadow that we so very clearly can see playing out in the world. And in such a manner where there is no more disguise. There is a lot of smoke and mirrors. There is a lot of tentative to, let's use a rather sophisticated term, to alchemize the truth. But when this alchemy is done collectively, well, that in physical reality equals the weaponization or using psychology and knowledge of how the human psyche works both individually and collectively as a weapon to control everything. Well, that is extremely powerful in the world right now, yet there is a very massive difference. And astrologically, this is the activation of Uranus. Yes, there are smokes and mirrors and illusions and all of that, but right now, the shadow does not wear its mask. Whereas, maybe just a few months ago, a year ago, we had the same energy at play, but even the shadow had a mask. So, with the smoke and mirrors, with the deception, the illusion and the fear, we just could not recognize it, regardless of what we tried, regardless of how, intensely we tried to seek the truth. We only got into deeper confusion, but now it is a bit different. The mask is off, and the truth is very simple, at least the rudimentary truth, that the universe itself wants to show us, but in a way that it's screaming right now. It's not delivering on a silver tray, it's not giving us the wisdom as, gentle breadcrumbs, gentle little pieces of information or wisdom or whatever that we can swallow comfortably, gently. It is screaming at us right now. It is like flooding us with it. And if we take a look at the symbolism of Capricorn, because today is a very important date. Today, Pluto, Mars and Venus meet in a sky in a conjunction, and this is where the conjunction is perfected. And this is so very important because Capricorn is ultimately the state, the government, the leader, the world stage, the big ruler. It can also be the tyrant, manager, etc., etc. And while this Pluto tells us clearly that we need structure, we need control in our lives, someone has to administer us in any way, shape, and form. The administration and the methodology itself, well, that is of course divine in its design. Because this is how things take place, let's say, in the divine spheres as well. In the ethereal spheres, there are ranks, there are roles, there are responsibilities, etc., etc. So there is a leadership, but the leadership where every side, every element of the management, of the divine management, let's say, well, it acts as representative. It does have to represent something of divine nature. And here down on earth, this is basically the energy of Capricorn. Human beings are social by nature, even by divine design, let's say. So of course we do need a certain kind of management, control, law, legislation, order, and discipline in our lives. But when the leaders, regardless of what that means and in which sense, sometimes even purely personal individual sense, like a leader can be your manager, your boss, a parent, someone who legally represents you, etc. Well, if that leader is actually doing you a massive disservice, if that leader, if that representative of yours is not just doing what it wants, they want, but actually countering, going against your will, well, there is a blockage, there is a problem, there is a massive distortion, because that part is not divine by nature. So the lesson, the biggest lesson of them all, and this is a very down-to-earth lesson, not even spiritual or deeply philosophical. When you pump power into someone, into a leader, into a king, into a manager, a representative, a boss, and you will not take your power back when things are already so severe that symbolically the knife already touches the bone, then we know that something is gonna happen. Either if we initiate it, we meaning everyone who is involved, and right now it's our species, or if the divine acts accordingly, but we know that this has to end, and this is when the astrological clock shows that the most radical transformation is here right now. It's no longer tomorrow, next year, next month. We're already deep into this. And it also gives us the tools. It also gives us the message, the instruction, which is very, very clear. Yes, it might not be the strong point of everyone, yet still everyone equally can tap into this, because the solution in the sky right now is definitely Jupiter, Neptune, and today the new moon in the sign of Pisces, and I'm going to be speaking about this in just a few moments because it's so very significant. Of course, we don't necessarily need this new moon yet, because even without, the solution is there. Pisces is communion. Pisces is boundless. Pisces is limitless, like love, like compassion, like the human spirit. And basically, how many times has history, the past, Pisces is always the past, has shown us that when love gets elevated to the most pure level, well, it can do true miracles in any way, shape, and form, and very many times not necessarily in a miraculous, supernatural way, through people, through their gestures, through what they do. And again, the key word here is communion. Everyone is the same. We see the victim within ourselves as well. Pisces is the best self-victimization energy and sign out there, but very, very rarely that is actually a positive energy, because if we simply say to the divine in this case, let's say, is just our collective consciousness. If we say to it, look, that person, that woman, that man, that child, whoever, is suffering things so horrible, I cannot even imagine being in the place of that person. Well, allow me to consider myself a victim of this as well, because I refuse to allow that person who entered my awareness, my reality, to be simply ignored. And some people can do a lot of things. For example, send humanitarian help if they have resources, help in any way, shape, and form. But even those people who might find themselves in, a very not favorable position that they just cannot help in any physical means, that's okay. The simple fact of choosing this empathy, of choosing this communion, embracing another person's victim status and making it at least morally, spiritually our own as well, that creates an incomprehensible amount of energy, and energy is power at the end of the day. And when that power has no other, let's say, means but to manifest in a very karmic way through our psyches, Pisces, it will do that, and that's how it turns into deep healing. The war and the destruction and the crimes and all of this, well, those are definitely going to pass. But the love, the compassion, the solidarity, and this very, very strong emotional and even spiritual divine awakening that this negativity has caused, that stays. That is not going anywhere. Like, think about certain charities which were created to commemorate a very tragic event. Doesn't really have to be a collective one, like, I don't know what kind of war memorial charity. Just a child suffered something and their parents made a charity in the child's name and what happened to them, for example. And that charity can outlive not just the child's parents, their initiators, but generations and generations, because the memory of the charitable act can become immortal. Everyone needs that. But of course, this is just an example. Charity is very, very specific to Pisces, of course. So we don't really need like a charity in a physical sense. What emotion this evoked now, and I'm speaking about the compassion, the love, and the fact that we want to be in the same boat. We desire to be in the same boat, at least morally, in spirit, in heart, with those people who are deeply suffering right now. Well, this already builds up an immense energy of healing, and that healing will get just stronger and stronger after this war ends, because healing is ultimately reconstruction, regeneration, rebuilding, etc., etc. And another thing which I have experienced very, very personally, simultaneously with this conflict, well, Pluto is ultimately the planet of death. It is god of the underworld. But there is also Mars in the picture. Mars in perfect exaltation to day 27 degrees of Capricorn. That is Mars's exalted degree. And Mars in exaltation, well, its worst possible expression is this. Well, that is without a shadow of doubt. Mars conjunct Pluto is war. One of its expression which played out so very many times in our lives, well, that is war. But its most elevated expression, that means courage, willpower, initiative, energy, the most beautiful expression of the divine masculine that can beat even the seven-headed dragon, symbolically speaking. And even if it cannot, the gesture and the heroism, the bravery, the courage, the strength, the power, well, that already ensured a different kind of victory. And of course, Venus is in the picture as well. Venus, the love, the heart, the emotion, the most sacred values. And in the sign of Capricorn, those sacred values are also totally physical as well. They are manifested. For example, a city's most iconic building, which is a memory of something massive, something important, something very emotional, of course, that happened in a countries or cities or whatever history. And that being destroyed, well, it's not the end of love, it's actually the rebirth of love, because that which was destroyed and which was so very valuable emotionally, well, you can imagine that it's going to be rebuilt bigger and better 10 times than what original was. And basically this goes for everything and for everyone. Yes, a lot of people have lost their lives, but the love us, the living, and their relatives and everyone feels for them. Well, right now, that love takes wings. Now, that love is almost as close to the divine sphere as possible. And that kind of love does big, 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 big things in any way, shape, and form. And also, what is very important, well, ultimately, this triple conjunction with an exalted Mars is in the sign of Capricorn. So, of course, it gives a tremendous power to Capricorn. So everyone who is a leader, everyone who is in authoritarian position, and all of this, yes. Yet, at the end of the week, on the 6th of March, both Venus and Mars are going to move into 0 degrees of Aquarius, where the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn took place on the 21st of December 2020. The beginning, the creation of the new paradigm. Well, Mars will activate that along with Venus, and Aquarius is all about freedom. Aquarius is all about the people. Aquarius is all about interhuman connection. Aquarius is all about the individual as well, because it is a dual sign. It is fixed, but dual. And from all of the signs, it is only Aquarius which doesn't really have an intermediary or a link between the duality. If we look at the glyph of Aquarius, those two waves are not connected to one another, so they can exist in a pure form simultaneously. And its highest expression is the individual, the unique, the authentic, the primal component of the collective, and also the collective as well, are equally as important, are equally free, are represented, are balanced, and they basically cooperate in a very, very progressive and harmonious way. That is the most ideal expression of Aquarius. So as Mars and Venus together simultaneously activate and energize the 0 degree of Aquarius, something new is not just being born. And that new, well, it's Aquarius, it's not necessarily physical, it's the thought, it is the principle, it is the highest ideological revolution, if that makes sense, which means a big shift of power. Chances are that after this week, as we head towards April, the power is definitely gonna shift, where it is gonna be people that will do very, very relevant and significant moves their own way, of course, because we must not ignore that Mars by the ancient was seen as the lower malefic because it started wars. Maybe in Aquarius it means a massive, massive uprising of the people. You know, Aquarius is the French Revolution. Basically, the French Revolution is one of the most ideal and perfect examples of what Aquarius does as an energy, and even the liberty, fraternity, and equality, those are the biggest key phrases of this part of the sky. So right now, this Pluto with Mars and Venus does provoke a lot of intensity in any way, shape, and form. As I said, both the shadow and the highest expression. So both infinite love, both never ever ever seen before courage and manifestations of moral integrity that actually physically save the world, but at the same time cruelty and violence and oppression at the end of the day as well. And these dance together. It's almost like a lava lamp where the two substances basically just chase each other. They attempt to mix with each other, but they ultimately cannot. So basically, the violence, the hatred, and let's just call it out, the symbolism of Capricorn, someone giving the orders for these, well, those are definitely not gonna dissolve the other substance, as in, symbolically speaking, back to the analogy of the lava lamp, the love part. Love will just grow. And this is where we get to another symbolism of Pluto. Pluto is the planet of the occult. Pluto rules everything that has to do with the metaphysical, especially in the sense that we have some kind of power over it. And with Venus and also Mars in the picture, this is where the sky is telling us when love truly has to grow and literally conquer the world, well, there has to be love being sent down from above. So Pluto, those souls who unfortunately had to go over, and also love being sent from below the rest of us who still breathe. And when the sky meets the earth, well, we know from sheer experience that big things happen, and usually it ends with a massive push into the right direction karmically, benefiting both our ancestors and those people who gave their lives for us, and naturally us and our children in the future as well. Both Pluto and Venus are also economical symbols. Venus is currency, Venus is the value, and Pluto is basically the economic strength, what you can do with money and value and resources, etc. So this is also a really, really powerful change economically, and we can also see that perfectly clearly playing out in the sky. And just think back, both to December and January, when every single astrologer, me included, were talking about this, and we still did not have this knowledge. We were just speculating that this upcoming conjunction of Venus, Mars, and Pluto, that which is active today, is gonna massively transform the world banking system, currency, economy in a very, very significant and, impactful way, where it's never ever gonna be the same again, ever again after. And look at today, where that change unexpectedly, in a way no one could really anticipate how this celestial pattern is physically gonna play out. And look here at this today. Right now, we do have sufficient clarity and experience to be able to at least give a very brute anticipation of where things economically worldwide are going to be heading very, very soon. But how this happened is also written in the sky, because we have Neptune, Jupiter, Sun, and Moon in the sign of Pisces. The Pisces and Virgo axis, amongst other things, the shadow side of this energy, is discrimination. Virgo is like practical discrimination, labeling you're this, that, and that. Pisces is more like, let's say, moral or spiritual or even religious discrimination. Sun, Moon, Jupiter in the second decan of Pisces, the Cancerian decan. Cancer is borders. Jupiter dissolves borders for certain people who are victims. Pisces is always the victim. Just remember Christ. Christ was basically sacrificed, and Christ was the best representative of Pisces. So when you think of Pisces and this sacrificial tendency of this sign, just think about Christ. And there were symbolic Christs in the world very, very recently. All the heroes, all the big gestures, some lost their lives, others are still going very, very strong, defending themselves. But all of these are gestures of heroism. And everything that moves these people, motivates them, makes them basically tick. Well, we can identify that as being the human spirit and greater love so very easily. All of us can feel this right now. Of course, especially people who are very, very close to the zone of conflict, like people from my culture, for example, people from the neighboring countries, for example, Bulgaria, Turkey. Basically, everyone in the region is sending help. But most importantly, Cancer and both Pisces, especially the second decan of Pisces, is ancestral energy. That which links people almost genetically. And most Slavic countries, Poland, Czech Republic, and most of the rest, they feel so very solitarily with the people of Ukraine that literally Ukraine's pain is their pain, and I saw this playing out literally. For example, I play an online game where there are players from every single country, and we're friends because we've been playing together for years. And there are Polish players and Czech players and many Slavic players from different Slavic countries, and all of them showed such a strong support, so much passion, so much love, so much fervor. And of course, not just verbally, but they sent help. They did what they could. So, another expression of Pisces. When love grows, when love is activated, and of course, Neptune in the Scorpionic decan of Pisces. When love and Scorpio death embrace themselves, when love and death are allies, of course in a macabre way, but still, then is when miracles kind of start happening. That is the first sign that the doors to something totally else, unexpected, are gonna be opening in a big way, as in this is where humanity is definitely entering a path it has chosen right now. And this is where we have to walk. We have to walk that path. There is no second guessing now. The choice was made. Our frequency, our energy, our thoughts, our emotions, and our authenticity, who it is that we are as a soul and as a being, as an identity, was already locked in the karmic GPS, so to speak. So all of us as a species are already heading towards a certain direction. Of course, we have been choosing this more unconsciously than consciously, but from ever since 2016-17 up until 2022, we had so much powerful divine and karmic energies preparing all of us for this. Remember the purges, remember the dark nights of the soul, remember all the doom and gloom that forced you to heal and purge and identify who it is that you truly are. Well, this is where you reap the reward for that now. But going back to Pisces, the discrimination. It does take a mutable energy like Pisces, of course not alone, with Jupiter and Neptune, it's two kings inside of it, to turn something ultimately very negative, discrimination, into a force of salvation. And the economic discrimination of Russia from everywhere. And I repeat, it's not really targeted at the people, it is targeted at Russia as an entity. And that is also the domain of Pisces. It is not real. Russia is a symbol, it is a name. Russia is composed of millions of souls. So this discrimination is not aimed at the human element, at the people. It is aimed at the entity who is causing the harm. So basically, this is one of the offensive qualities of Pisces, starving the aggressor from its nutrients. On a very personal level, what Pisces does when Pisces really wants revenge, it ignores, but in such a way that you just can't help yourself but feel very, very bad. Pisces is that masterful of unconscious bombardment. And yet, this Jupiter is so strong that it takes the most negative expression of Pisces and uses it as a tool of salvation. So how ingenious is the creator, the great architect of the sky once again. And we also have this new moon phenomenon today, sextiling Uranus and also conjunct Jupiter. Jupiter generosity, compassion. Jupiter is, in the sign of Pisces, what religion morally is all about. And morally it's about communion again. So of course, this is where borders dissolve for some people, for the immigrants, for those who are in crisis, and they are invited, they're embraced, they're encouraged. So this is where the human community is showing its very, very best qualities. And Pisces is also a dual sign, so the other expression of that energy is perfectly playing out, where borders, symbolic borders, economic borders are closing for the enemy. But of course, this is where Neptune is at play once again. Who is the enemy? Is there an enemy? All of this is an illusion, let's not get this wrong. There is no good guy, bad guy, everyone's bad. Including us, all of us. As a species, right now, the universe is showing us clearly that we are not very masterful of what peace, cooperation, discipline, harmony, negotiations, tactics actually means. So, this is a bit of my toxicity, and please forgive me for this, but all the channelers with the intergalactic beings, if we can't negotiate with ourselves, how on earth can we expect understanding or any kind of help for someone who sees this as a horror show? Because if you would look at this from a divine perspective, intelligent, rational members of the same species cannot agree over, ultimately, a conventional illusion that borders and the limitations of groups of human beings based on nationality and stuff like that. Well, from a totally down-to-earth human level, of course, we understand why this illusion and this symbolism, this conventional symbolism, that there exists a border and the limitations, and you're Bulgarian and the others Ukrainian and whatever. Of course, these are necessary, but if we get lost in the illusion in such an intense manner that we forget why they exist and we forget our humanity in the process, and we just turn ultimately that which should be a more philosophical or legal jurisprudence type of discussion into a heinous crime. Well, just think rationally. Would you allow such a species out in space or to communicate with other beings? No, you wouldn't. Especially when they fail their karmic test. The simplest test of all, don't shoot the gun or don't attack or whatever. But this is also the temptation when there is Mars conjunct Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. If there was ever a more ideal moment that kind of promises you success to attack, well, that is the opportunity. But then again, if you're so wise and intelligent, don't ignore Neptune, because Neptune can solve absolutely any problem by drowning it, dissolving it, returning it into pure spirit. And I do believe that whatever was done at this moment is gonna reflect one way or another on the 12th of April. Why? Well, because this conjunction, triple conjunction in Capricorn, is taking place at 27 degrees. The conjunction of Neptune and Jupiter in Pisces on the 12th of April is also going to take place in the last degrees of the sign of Pisces, and Venus herself is going to be in exaltation at 27 degrees of Pisces in April. So if this is the flare-up, if this is the acutization of the problem is rage and violence, because we have to look at our species as, let's say, an individual, and this is his natal chart. When someone is starting to lose their self-containment, containment of their anger or power or plans or visions or whatever it is, well, there is sedatives. Pisces, amongst other things, rules hospitals, isolation, quarantine, and anything that has to do with medical care, immunity, etc., psychedelics, and every drug that alters your state of consciousness, like antidepressants, etc. And if we take this symbolically, and the patient is a species, well, we're gonna be administered exactly what we need. The problem is, some people will feel at calm, they will feel at bliss, while other people will go a little bit insane. But that is all about April's horoscope, so we don't need to speak about that part. But what I'm saying here is, whatever happens now will have some kind of repercussion around the 12th of April, because that conjunction of Jupiter and Neptune is gonna try to heal this wave of violence. What do you counter fire with? Water. So on one hand, we have to expect big floods in April, but even this this new moon already created massive flooding in the world, conjunct Jupiter. So imagine what kind of flooding we'll experience and see somewhere playing out in April. And yet another energy which is perfected in this present moment is Saturn meeting Mercury in the sign of Aquarius. Now, one of the playouts of this energy is the freedom of speech and so very many other freedoms, because Aquarius, as I said, remember, when you think about Aquarius, always remember the French Revolution and their key words. So Mercury in Aquarius is all that. The idea, the information of freedom, liberty, and equality in any way, shape, and form, like a law or what we feel inside of us, unwritten law, unwritten rules. And Saturn is the restriction. Saturn is that which stops it. It stops freedom. It stops freedom of speech, freedom of communication, or it stops a certain people, a certain category. It can also represent discrimination. But at the end of the day, this is an evolutionary energy. So why is Saturn doing this? To tell Mercury, so our mental spheres, that if you don't, this is reality. This is a big reality check. This is what you have in your world right now. Freedom of speech does not exist the way you think it exists. If you don't like it, then prepare to do something about this. And Saturn also gives us the tools. Greater intelligence. Outsmart them. And never forget that Saturn, according to the ancient, was the greatest malefic. It was the planet which brought disease, destruction, doom and gloom, etc. But in Aquarius, it does have, let's say, a brighter side, because Aquarius is ultimately the sign of humanitarianism. And Mercury, when energized by a not very expansive energy, for example, Jupiter, quite the contrary, by the energy of contraction, it can take the shape and form of what we call Loki, so outlaw, and anonymous, and people fighting against this abuse over the internet through hacking, through whatever means they can find with technology. Another beautiful expression. There is restriction, but there is also fight against it. And ultimately the biggest lesson is that if we don't like what we experience right now, Some people don't like that anyone can say what they want, while other people don't like that they cannot say what they want. So each person and each community, each group, Aquarius, will fight for what they believe in. Some for freedom, others for greater restriction of freedom of speech. And the internet and communication and everything that has to do with that. And there will come a time in March and towards April when both Mars and Venus will meet Saturn as well. And when Mars meets Saturn, that will be the time of big action. It is true that when the two malefics meet once every 2 years, that is not always the most delightful expression of the energy, but the change that they produce, that is long lasting. And even if sometimes it comes through more negatively, it still leads to something positive, because that is what Saturn wants. Saturn always wants us to learn the lesson and embody it. Saturn is ultimately dignity, discipline, and mastery. And, the most magical or the most unusual expression of this energy is, and I do believe this is also due to the dual nature of Aquarius, whatever is going on in the world, us individually are one way or another playing that out in our lives. For example, where it is right now in the present that we feel we are victims, where are the greatest restrictions in our lives? What exactly are we doing to demolish our restrictions? How do we want to change? Do we have to flee? Do we have to fight? Or do we have to build and construct? And of course, this year, 2022, is all about connections, union, partnership, relationships. So on one hand, those people who do have a connection, a partnership in their lives in any way, shape and form, romantic or perhaps business or whatever, this is quite a good opportunity to grow together, to learn from each other, and to create almost like a symbiotic relationship where it can get so very intimate, spiritually, or better said, psychologically in the future, where there is going to be like a telepathy or a kind of very strong empathy between the partners, and that means something wonderful for the long-term future. On the other hand, those who are single do feel the urge, do feel the need to have someone in their lives. As I said, of course, for the majority is romantic energy and desire. But of course, this can come in any shape and form. It can be a friendship, a brotherhood, business alliance, whatever kind of alliance. But this is where the inner forces are guiding us very, very strongly, almost in an uncontrollable way, to find someone, not to be alone, or at least not to stand alone in our principles or in whatever that we want to do. So following this impulse and not believing, if there was a moment when we must not believe in fairy tales, and fairy tales, for example, twin flame and the kind of soulmate where they drop from the sky into your life, or the big magical story just weaves itself immediately. Now, this is not the year for that. Yes, we do have the Neptune and Jupiter conjunction, which is miraculous energy, and it might represent exactly this fated big soulmate kind of connection. But that is an illusion, unfortunately. This kind of energy tells us that we are one. There can be another person out there in the world for you, because the human spirit is one. Why rely on a connection that you brought into this life before you were born? Isn't that like the past and the old paradigm, how things used to play out in love novels and love stories? Right now, in the quantum age, let's say, this is where you find alliances in a different way, and perhaps the alliances you find in this lifetime, in this incarnation, you're finding them to have them or to have a connection, a union for future incarnations. This lifetime might be more important than you could ever imagine, because this is where you're making connections with certain souls you could simply never ever connect to outside of matter. And that is very funny and ironic and particular in this way, because one would imagine that quite the opposite of this is true. But the universe works in miraculous ways. This day and age is the meeting point of many souls who could not connect to one another in the classical spirit way, in the divine planes. This is where a lot of, let's say, worlds and dimensions meet in one point, and that's how foreigners can connect and meet each other. Of course, all of this to be understood on a soul level, on a spiritual, symbolic level. So basically, trust your instinct, because right now your instinct is much, much stronger than the fairy tale intuitive impulse, which would, lead you to the big love story that's only in legends and books. This is not the year for that. The North Node in Taurus, simplicity of nature and the perfection of nature. We can never ever outsmart nature, at least not yet. And the South Node in Scorpio. Scorpio is sexuality. Scorpio is deep, deep, deep instincts. Scorpio is when the instinct takes over you and it leads you somewhere very, very important. So this is how we can expect these connections to take place, where we feel very, very drawn to that person. But it's not the fantasy, it's not the illusion, and it's not really the big unconditional Neptunian love that we feel, but just a deep fascination, just something that we cannot identify and that we never ever felt before, like a quantum kind of attraction. And if we meet that person, and if there is genuine compatibility between the two sides, and that compatibility is mostly, do the two sides truly want to understand each other and form this alliance? And if the answer is yes, then in a few months, let's say, or a few years, you together can generate and build and create the love story that you dreamed of. You do what you want with your connection, with your union after, but first of all, it's very, very important to find the right person. And love is of Neptunian realm, so this is where we have to be very, very careful not to deceive ourselves. And also, this year, the partnerships and the symbolism of this too, well, it's not just spiritual, it is not just, the usual theme where, this big soul connection and stuff like that. You're here actually to work with that person physically, either your survival or you have to do something with that person, that which is more practical than anything, because you're building your longer term future. So that involves so many things. A house, a land, both of your problems, physical, material, legal, whatever problems need to be resolved and settled. And it is exactly this part that is more important this year than the spiritual and unconditional Neptunian part. We already had a lot of that. And this is where, in 12th of April, we're going to have the peak, the very, very biggest peak of that. And today's new moon is very, very important, because this is where Pisces is always the finality, yet a new moon is always the beginning of the new cycle. So this to me says, this new moon ends something first, as in more likely this week, it ends something in your soul. It ends something in your psyche. It invites you to release. So this can be an extremely tearful and emotional day, after which your dream, your inspiration, your most elevated fantasy will definitely birth something new. And that something new may be a state of being, or simply you finding your place in the world, just a feeling, but that feeling can be more important and valuable and make you feel safer than anything matter could offer. And with Uranus, today might be a day full of surprises, especially of karmic nature. So this concludes today's recording. Thank you so very much for listening. Thank you for all the love and support. If you enjoy my updates and they add any value to your life and you would like to support me, you can donate on the PayPal link in the description below. But this being said, I wish everyone infinite strength and infinite love. May today's new moon purge away this horrible nightmare and help us create a new and much more optimistic and compassionate future dream for all of us. Thank you. Until next time. Bye for now.